When most people think of cornflakes, they probably think about curbing their appetite for breakfast. What they probably don't think about is curbing their appetite for sex. Yet that's precisely what they were designed to do. So, today we're going to take a look at how cornflakes were actually invented to curb sexual appetites. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below what other food histories you would like to hear about. Okay, we're about to pour some cold water on breakfast cereal. In his unending war against all things sex-related, John Harvey Kellogg created a variety of strange and terrifying medical machines at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. For example, he invented everything from slapping machines, which are exactly what they sound like, to machines that ran electric currents through your urethra. Oh my, no thank you. But that was just the tip of the incredibly spooky iceberg. Kellogg also suggested some even more disturbing methods to keep children, in particular, from touching themselves. According to the man himself, bandaging the organs was a very successful way to prevent one from petting the biscuits. But tying the hands only worked in some cases. How so? Well, Kellogg noticed that even with their hands tied, the kids would find other ways to play with the Frankenbeans. Necessity is the mother of invention. Kellogg also gave his seal of demented approval to covering the organs with a cage, which he said had been practiced with entire success.
Chastity belt? Oh, that's going to chafe my willy.
Since no in-depth analysis of Kellogg's psychological profile exists, it's difficult to determine if he was a sadist or just really bored. Whatever the truth about him may have been, one thing is clear. He thought the act of getting it on, the only natural and successful way to procreate, was, in some sense, impure. He believed this so thoroughly that Kellogg and his wife, Ella Eaton, never consummated their marriage. They are known to have slept in separate bedrooms for the entire length of their marriage. What's the point? That being said, they did adopt and raise 8 children at Kellogg's Battle Creek Sanitarium. Lucky kids. So you're probably wondering how cornflakes fits with this whole anti-playing with oneself thing. Well, Kellogg steadfastly believed diet greatly influenced the libido, which means he's clearly never had a shepherd's pie. He thought people should sustain themselves on a diet similar to a barn animal, since he thought barnyard animals never got it on. Clearly, he's never been to a farm. Kellogg thought eating meat would lead to the desire to touch the cookies, and that anything with any sort of spice or flavor would also lead to immediate, intense horniness. I want to take this guy to a Thai restaurant. Kellogg also believed tea and coffee led thousands to perdition, and that candies, spices, cinnamon, cloves, peppermint, and all strong essences powerfully excite the genitals and lead to the same result. This is exactly why he decided to invent cornflakes and make them, arguably, the blandest, most tasteless thing ever. Kellogg's aversion to nature meant, obviously, that Kellogg never had any children of his own. But he did run a household of more than 40 adopted and foster children, which is pretty disturbing, given that in his book he suggested that to identify a child punching the sheriff, you need to catch them in the act. To Kellogg, this meant storming into a child's room unannounced and ripping their clothes off. For a male, you would see an obvious flag at full staff. For a female, you had to dig a little deeper, in the most insanely creepy way possible. That is, he literally suggested parents inspect their daughters. And if that's not horrible enough, he didn't limit his treatment suggestions for children to inspections. When it came to the so-called desperate case of one particular 10-year-old girl, he went as far as to actually remove her pleasure organ. He felt it had become necessary, and he expressed hope that she was permanently cured. Of what? Then, looking to forever secure himself a place in our nightmares, he noted, "We have heard nothing to the contrary since, as the remedy seemed to be effectual. Never a child protection agency around when you need one." One could ponder if Kellogg ever read Freud, and if he did, what he thought about the development of the psychosexual stages. After all, the two figures were alive around the same time. That being said, they had extremely different views about how and why children would begin to touch their junk at an early age. Kellogg believed this natural habit was formed in utero, because the mother touched herself or had intercourse during the pregnancy. Whereas Freud, who was no stranger to serious weirdness himself, was more of the opinion that playing one's own fiddle was more like a developing person's natural introduction to their own body. In what we might assume was rooted in a desire to set a world record for hyperbole, Kellogg once wrote, "Neither plague, nor war, nor smallpox have produced results so disastrous to humanity as the pernicious habit of onanism. Such a victim dies, literally, by his own hand." Given this belief, he took the trouble to outline 39 symptoms of smacking it in a treatise entitled Plain Facts for Old and Young, embracing the natural history and hygiene of organic life. Some of the symptoms he posits are acne, palpitations, epilepsy, and warts. Kellogg thought that speaking out against this and encouraging people to change their diets would help rein in people's predilection for self-lust and contribute to a healthier and more spiritual climate. John Kellogg and his brother, W.H. Kellogg, invented cornflakes while working at Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan. But while John was the so-called medicine man with a heart of puritanical stone, Will had more of an entrepreneurial spirit. The Kellogg brothers spent some time trying various grains to make thin sheets of cracker-type substances, using basic wheat and oat-based ingredients. An accident in the lab one day led to the creation of Flakes. And once they figured out corn was a better source material than wheat, cornflakes went to market and were immediately tested out on the Kellogg Sanitarium patients in 1894. So, W.H. eventually purchased the rights to cornflakes so he could alter the recipe, specifically by adding sugar. John, however, was fiercely opposed because he believed a sugar rush can lead to a rush of blood to your party time regions, which, as we know, John was adamantly against. Undeterred, Will started the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company in 1906 and later added bran flakes to the rotation. Reverend Sylvester Graham was one of the most outspoken members of the Temperance Movement in the 1830s. He was also among the first to champion the idea that a plain diet of oats and wheat could successfully curb the libido. While others in the Temperance Movement focused on the dangers of alcohol, Graham focused most of his sermons on the horrors of self-gratifying oneself, which he said inflamed the brain more than natural arousal. Graham's preaching was incredibly successful, and although he didn't do it himself, it led directly to the invention of the graham cracker during the mid-19th century. The original cracker wasn't anything like the sweet s'mores bread we know today. It was originally made with unbleached flour, bran, and coarsely ground germ, and it was marketed as a great buffing the torpedo deterrent for adolescent boys. Though the product was named after the Reverend Graham and inspired by his beliefs, he had no direct connection to them, and he never profited from the association. Kellogg had a bunch of bizarre methods for dealing with the urge to choke the chicken, and eating flakes made from unsweetened corn was really the least of them. Terrifyingly, some of his ideas amounted to little more than straight-up mutilation. For men, he suggested piercing the member with a silver thread to make an erection painful. For women, he proposed burning the hoo-ha with carbolic acid to make it painful to touch. In modern times, vegetarians are often perceived as being liberal in many of their beliefs. It may be a surprise, then, to realize the history of American vegetarianism has strong ties to two men who absolutely hated sex. For example, according to Adam D. Shprintzen, the author of The Vegetarian Crusade, The Rise of an American Reform Movement, 1817 to 1921, graham cracker creator and anti-fun activist Sylvester Graham associated eating meat with acting like an animal. But wait, humans are animals, aren't they? He believed you should avoid these kinds of primal instincts, which included getting the urge. While it absolutely does not excuse his more sadistic beliefs and behaviors, it's worth noting that Kellogg's point of view didn't form in a vacuum. He was, as they say, very much a product of his time. The Temperance Movement took a stance against alcohol, tobacco, sex, and self-gratification. The Victorians could be a stuffy bunch, and with spiritual revivals simultaneously taking place all over the Western world, there was no shortage of shaming going on. There were even several books published at the time that specifically condemned the self-act. Ononia, or the heinous sin of self-pollution and all its frightful consequences, was a fun one, as was Samuel Tissot's Treatise on the Diseases Produced by Onanism. So with media producing books like this at the time, we might understand the mentality into which John Kellogg was born. So what do you think? What's your favorite breakfast cereal? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.